So usually first 9 to 13 seconds is lost in translation or on transmission here. Yeah.
Cool.
How do you spell your family name, Kyle?
Rojas,
Rojas.
Rojas. Yeah. Mhm.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Hello, everyone. Another block chat, and this block chat, guys, is super interesting for a few reasons. First reason is that we're sitting with a gentleman who has an amazing background, and to tell you about it in a second, but also someone who's working on a project, part of a team that is considered the Google of Web3 or the Google of distributed ledger technologies. And we'll put this in perspective. What I promise you off in this block chat is that it will be interesting, it will be fun, but also you'll make so much sense and you learn new things. We'll all learn new things, hopefully, within this block chat. Again, with Makram, Denis, Petrovcic, and today with Kyle Rojas from The Graph. Kyle, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. I
Denis,
appreciate it.
it's a pleasure having you. Kyle, I want to give you the space here to introduce us, if you don't mind, to three things. One is yourself, your background, if you don't mind. Two, your how did you explain the graph to the first people you talked to about it, and how would you explain the graph today? How would you explain the project today? How would you explain tech? And then we'll go into live use cases and how is it as a solution, because tech is only as good as how it makes life. And I believe the technology you're working on is an essential part of many futuristic technologies, and many pioneering organizations depend on it. I'll leave the space to you. Please go ahead.
So those are a few very deep questions. I'll take them one at a time and maybe we chat in between. So I'm not talking for 10, 15 minutes. But as far as who I am, I was born and raised in California. I enlisted in the Air Force at a really young age, 17 years old, and then served all around the world for about 12 years. First working on fighter jets, then living in Japan and doing a political position out there, and then being in the operational intelligence space, having a lot of fun around the world. And then to make the transition to the civilian world, I got my MBA at Rice University here in Houston. And then I worked almost 7 years at Goldman Sachs. But in the end, I just realized it wasn't the life I wanted to lead. It wasn't fulfilling for me at all to only have a mission focused on my bottom line. And while at Goldman, I was fortunate enough to have been investing and participating in the crypto space since around late 2016. And along the way, like most people, once they fall down that rabbit hole, I just became a true believer in not only the fact that it's a big part of the future, Web3 technology, but also it's the better way to build for the world for a ton of reasons, which I'm sure we can discuss or will discuss. So I quit Wall Street, dove headfirst into my blockchain career, and now I'm almost a year, actually, I'm a year and a half, time flies, about a year and a half into my Web3 life at Edge and Node, where my official title is BDM Partnerships, where I also help with developer success, marketing operations, anything I need to do to make the graph a success. So happy to dive in on anything there, or we can take it in a
Two
different direction,
things.
start talking about the graph. Yeah.
Perfect. You've done investments at Goldman. What did you do in investments in Goldman?
So I actually worked in private wealth management for the private bank. So managed money for the 9 and 10 figure folks, family offices, nonprofits, entrepreneurs, CEOs, and the like, and sometimes just some old family monies. And it was fun, and it was good getting to know those folks. And it was also a superpower that I hadn't learned of, speaking truth to power in the world, meaning people that you think might be a lot um, better or different than you, and realizing that we're all kind of the same people, just some have some more money, and everyone's looking for advice no matter what. And then being seen as, all throughout my 30s, a true advisor to sometimes people 70 and over from different parts of the world that are were experts in what they were doing, but didn't know and didn't pay attention to the financial world and alternative asset world every day and night. And then I did a lot in lending. Naturally, through the private bank, I worked with the merchant bank, securities division, and investment banking division, doing a lot of stuff and facilitating, helping intro and walk through transactions in that side. So I had a ton of fun and learned a lot along the way. But towards the end, once you do it, you're successful. You have a really good quality life, business, client list, and it just becomes more the same every day. And I think whenever I stop feeling challenged, I get bored. I get bored easily with anything. So I was finally okay of saying I didn't want to be the people ahead of me, and I could see 20 years down the road, and I knew I'd be unhappy. So I had to make a change,
So
and I
you
blew up a
chose a
really good.
project. You've done the change and you've done the choice first that you wanted to exit corporate life and Wall Street and you want to go towards an entrepreneurial life and you chose a project. For everyone who's listening now, who's part of a project or who's planning to choose a project or who's even planning to invest in a project, what and how did you make your choice? You're someone who comes from the investment world. You understand risk, you understand due diligence, you understand how hollow organizations are formed and how real projects are formed. How did you make the choice? What did you research? What are the triggers that showed you that you're going the right direction when you joined the organization you have?
It's a good question, and I'd say the same mindset from when I was looking at projects as a participant, and then when I was looking at projects to join the team, right? Because I'm investing my time and opportunity cost at this point, or at least facing opportunity cost. And thankfully, or fortunately, since I've been in the space a while, since again late 2016, I met a lot of founders and builders in the space, become friends with them. So when I've went out to look for a job, I was able to ask them directly in a lot of cases. And I even got some really good offers at exchanges. I was talking to protocols and chains and even C-level offers in some verticals, and both Web3 and not. And I decided to take a potentially much lower role, even to have a lot less money coming in because of a couple things. One was that I was finally at the point in my life where I get to work to learn, not work to earn. So I was advisor to folks. I've become fairly good with our family money. And even though we don't need much, I still drive the 10-year-old Toyota Corolla after Goldman and now Web3. We have a modest home, but I wanted something that would stretch my technical muscles because I've been investing and participating in the space as a heavy protocol user for a long time. And I knew that I didn't know a lot of technical understanding from the ground up. So I wanted to choose the most complex technology to work on, not only because of getting to work on the technology, but one that was at the nexus of the entire space. So a chain agnostic, non-tribalistic kind of plus to everyone, being able to help everyone because I'm definitely a people pleaser in my personality, and just be able to get to meet every single person, every single project in the space. And I'd say very few projects are able to deliver that more than the Graph ecosystem. And I'm at Edge and Node, the founding team behind the Graph, one of many core dev teams working on the technology now, which is just a protocol. But anyone who wants to use the Graph, anyone using the Graph, anyone who wants to partner with the Graph, that all kind of flows through me. And I get to work with folks, some of the OG builders, founders of all of these amazing dApps, amazing chains every day. And that alone is worth so much to me. So that's one reason I chose this ecosystem. Another reason, and a reason I really chose this team, was even though I was an early Graph participant, let's say I had GRT, I was waiting to participate in the network, and I've been delegating and curating for a long time and have just recently got involved in things like indexing. It wasn't until I really started diving into Yaniv's, Brandon's, Tegan's, Giannis's, their backgrounds and the why of this, the why of what they're doing, the why they're taking on such a big challenge, and the why that they have such high levels um, of expectation. And that's what got exciting to me, the values orientation. And I knew I needed really good mentors in the decentralization space to really understand why we're doing this, not just going out to make a buck, not just going out to build something that achieves whatever. And I've become even more values oriented on why we're doing this, what it means for the world, the potential for the world. And even if everything goes belly up, having a mission this important to me helps me sleep better. It makes me happier. It makes me prouder when I tell my son and eventually daughter when she's old enough, she's only 2, and friends and family what I'm doing. It means a lot to me. And so that's worth a lot of value,
So,
personal,
guys,
emotional
just to
utility.
tell everyone, so Kyle looked at a real organization and looked, regardless of the size of the team, a real mission. Now, to explain to everyone what is the graph and what is trying to do, here, when we look at the noise in Web2 today, or in organizations in general, we see too much data. And too much of data with time becomes white noise. Unless data is indexed properly, data is not only useless, it becomes a burden. So your asset, which is data, becomes a liability. And by the way, I'm guilty in one of our companies to build such a liability over time. I've built a company where we had amazing data for so long, and I did not really look at indexing, the simplicity of what it is when it starts, the complexity of what it is after years of accumulating all of this data.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes not only useless, but a burden. The graph solves this in Web3 and distributed ledger technology. How? Um, and then we'll go to applications. How does the graph solve this? And what does the graph do as well?
Sure, I'll start at a high level because I could take a few different routes there. I'd say the graph is decentralizing data indexing and query services for every project and every integrated chain in the space, currently integrated with 39 chains and networks. And the graph ecosystem speaking with 50 to 60 more chains, and will eventually index all chains, likely across the entire blockchain ecosystem. But if you think of where people were when the graph was founded in 2017, until the graph, no projects had worked to solve the problem of reading data off of blockchains, let alone organize it and make it accessible in any scalable way. And if you think about the blockchain ecosystem, it's mostly about interaction peer-to-peer permissionlessly and then recording those transactions on a blockchain. So because of that, again, in Telegraph, developers had to either manually sift through transactions or like think of digging through Etherscan on many chains, Polygon Scan and so on, or run their own servers, index the data themselves, and then build and maintain their own APIs, wasting very expensive developer resources that should be spent on building and improving a project's core product and services. And so the graph
Sorry,
solved that.
here, Kyle, allow me to interrupt you here.
Sure.
I would want, if you don't mind, this and what it means to people. So, okay, so prior to the graph, developers really needed to run their own servers or do it manually, which is ridiculous to be done. Yeah, you can do the last year manually. How about doing the last 10 years when there is hundreds of thousands of transactions? Um, can you explain it, please, to the lame me? How would and what does this mean to people? What does this mean to the communities? What does this mean to companies? What does this mean to organizations and to the
Mhm.
ecosystem in general?
A couple things. To start on the simple side, any website or application you go to in the Web3 space that interacts with the blockchain or just needs blockchain data in general, it wouldn't work without data flowing into it. They can do it themselves, which a lot of people try to do, but that's extremely expensive and difficult, still with centralized choke points. You can go through some, there are some centralized folks doing this, but still it goes out. When there's downtime, there's nothing you can do. The graph is the only solution that's decentralizing right now across almost 230 indexers, to where when 1 or 10 or 50 go down, it automatically flows to other indexers and eats up that capacity. So the uptime is drastically better because those almost 230 indexers around the world are stationed at different places. The routing is a lot faster, so the latency is many multiples faster than centralized technology, and the quality of service is at par. So, 4 nines in a lot of cases, which is great. But okay, so simply, you go to uniswap.info, the analytics page, it wouldn't run without the graph. PancakeSwap, QuickSwap, Trader Joe, Spooky Swap, most every large AMM and exchange, the largest on any integrated chain, wouldn't run their analytics page without the graph. Because if you think of every single transaction being a different shaped and colored and flavored candy, about this big, and then you think of the World Cup football stadium right now, filled with all those different candies. What if you need something at the bottom of the pile? What if you need something in row 34, seat double A, immediately in 100 milliseconds, which is practically immediate, indiscernible from immediate? What the graph does is through subgraphs, which are open APIs, and they're just a blueprint for the house, and I could explain that later. It automatically organizes that into sections based on however you want to organize the data. But let's say somebody wants to, I want every candy that's blue, this shade of blue, and then these other hundreds of shades of blue, and then other colors. I want every candy in this shape, and then it organizes all that. And it does that every single block, because every block on every chain, more candy is flown to the top and just airdropped in. And there's, like you said, in most cases, it's very, very difficult to get information. In many cases, it's absolutely impossible. Even with an NFT portfolio, you can see what something's worth right now and what it should be worth going from, who owns it essentially. But it's almost impossible to look back manually and see how much it was worth when it went from this person to this person, and then look at portfolio performance across the entire ecosystem. So think of the graph as just organizing all those candies into a technological system that flows into a front end in 100 milliseconds at any time, and continually organizes it as more candy drops in. And I have different analogies. That's a simple one.
Let me, if you don't mind, before
Sure.
going further with what, because again, it's technology, it's an opportunity for everyone in the world, as well as challenges, and we'll talk about the challenges in a second, starting from the barrier to entry for indexers and beyond, because I'm sure challenges evolve also with time.
Mhm.
Here, Dennis, we're users, yeah, we use subgraphs at Blocksquare. Why? And what does this mean to us? So the what Kyle talked about today in tech terms, what does this mean to our organization? So let's start with, if it wasn't the graph, what would we be using today? Let's start with that.
Well, yeah, it's, I would say it's very close to what Kyle explained for us,
I
right?
was hoping
So,
for something. I was hoping for something from an organization as a user point
but
of view.
as a user point of view, I mean, it solves so many things, but the beauty of it is that you are relying on this decentralized network of indexers, which can potentially grow infinitely, right? While on the other side, what you have two options. You have either a centralized provider that does the indexing in a centralized manner, which means that, if it's big enough, let's say if Google would be providing this, you have a reliable organization that can serve data to you, and you kind of can rely that your DApp will keep on working because that organization is going to feed that data to you, theoretically, right? But with the
But here
graph,
you need
you're
to trust it.
sure, but
You need to trust
with the
it, and you need
graph,
to
you're
trust that
sure
process
that
as
it's
well.
going to
Yeah.
happen no matter what, because it's decentralized. So there's always going to be somebody indexing and providing data to you. So, there's an economic model behind it that kind of guarantees uptime and deliverability of data, of on-chain data. So that's, I think, the kind of the, and because there's no big enough centralized providers, you might end up at one moment in time, finding yourself with a provider who changed pricing model, who changed access model. But maybe, there was a merger acquisition of it, by another company, services discontinued. Here, that reliability, I think, it's key with the subgraph. And on the other side, if you would build your own thing, I mean, you don't. Not. It really depends on the size, but for a startup to maintain its own infrastructure, it's gonna, probably cost
It
so
doesn't
much.
make sense, yeah. At the end of the day, if you can have something provided to you at that level of reliability as a again in a distributed manner where your risk is distributed, your possibility of a downtime is approximately nothing, and your ability to grow and scale also, because it's all about scalability. Why would you go and create it on your own? It's something like as if you can have tokenization technology as a SaaS model. Would you go and build your own? It makes much less sense, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of similar in a way to our value proposition on the market, where we said, look, real estate is going to be tokenized and it's going to require a certain type of infrastructure. If we think that every company startup is going to do its own thing, it's probably going to be too expensive for them to even enter that market. So if we don't want to have a market where there's, a Facebook and an Amazon, we need to have an infrastructure where there can be thousands of marketplaces around that can kind of locally serve investors with deals that come from that region or place. And what we can do is, because of how we're building our tech, we can decentralize ownership of it throughout time as we're building up the DAO. And I think the challenges that the graph kind of went through over time and overcame by, probably it starts with an idea, then it's a project, and then Edge and Node as, the company behind the graph
And becomes
went
one of the
the route
developers,
of
because currently it's one of
decentralizing
them.
that infrastructure, the ownership of that infrastructure. I think that's something that the graph has done beautifully, because, it's now, but Kyle probably knows best, of the challenges that were, since 2000, you said 2017,
That's when it was founded.
is
Yeah.
it? And yeah.
Here you
Yeah, I
go,
think
Kyle.
it's
I got you a
interesting.
testimonial here from someone who's using now. Before I go back to Dennis with where do we use currently subgraphs, and how do we use them, and what does that mean to our users as well? What does it mean to our community as well, to people who depend on our technology as well as our partners? Kyle, allow me to go back to you and understand more of. So we understand how is the graph currently helping the industry, helping ecosystems develop, sustain, and grow. Um, is there anything more you would add there? And then after that, we would go to use cases and the roadmap. Where are we going from here? How is the organization, if I could say the organization today, because I believe everyone involved currently is part of that decentralized organization. However, how is that organization dealing with challenges, challenges in market, challenges in tech handling, again, challenges similar to the challenges from barrier to entry, the very high barrier to entry with indexers and the rest. Would you like to add something first on what is the graph value proposition today for partners, developers, organizations, and users?
Sure. I'll start from a high level on what kind of value it's adding. And when you think of any developer in the space, when they come to start a project, they always make a few decisions. One is which blockchain or blockchains to use. another is what Oracle you're going to use, and another is finding data. You don't go build your own blockchain. Usually don't go build your own Oracle. And you're probably not going to want to build your own data indexing stuff because one, DevOps folks are extremely expensive. Two, it's extremely hard. And that's what's important about infrastructure. But what's cool about Web3 is we're rebuilding infrastructure to be public goods. The core developer teams don't extract any value from the protocol. There's obviously token generation event and then new token issuance, a portion of which goes to EdgeNode and the foundation. But besides that, every transaction, every GRT, the work utility token in the ecosystem that is flowing through, it doesn't go to EdgeNode or accrue to EdgeNode or the foundation or any other core developers at all, unless we participate as indexers, curators, delegators. All value accrues to participants. And that's really cool. Changing the economics, changing the incentive structure away from value extraction to abundance, an abundance mindset where everyone is economically incentivized in an aligned way. And that's been fun too, to see this build out, to help it build out, to talk through the protocol economics, to really try to game theory what not only will help build the best technology, but also help incentivize the best behavior and disincentivize the worst behavior. So that's been so much fun for me too. As to what else, aside from DeFi that I mentioned, the graph powers as a public good and just infrastructure that people can come in, build, and play with. It powers, let's say, most of the biggest data analytics platforms: Masari, CoinGecko, Token Terminal, biggest cross-chain dApps like Balancer, Sushi, Connext, Lido, Premia, and others, and then projects for most other vertical in the space, such as bridges, wallets, identity, and so much more. What's amazing is that in the adoption, around a year ago, the ecosystem was celebrating 1 billion queries per month. And we are consistently, the ecosystem, not we, is consistently seeing in the peak of the bear market 1 to 2 billion per day query calls, API calls every single
Oh,
day
wow. So
across.
1 second, that's very significant. So a year ago, you were seeing 1 billion per month, and today you're seeing 1 to 2 billion per day.
Not only that, it was, I think it was a little over a year ago, but we were celebrating. There was a blog. It was a huge milestone to have 1 billion queries overall aggregate over a month. We are consistently one to, I'd say around 1.5 every single day API calls. And what's even more exciting to me as a business kind of BD partnerships mind is that a lot of that's on the hosted service. Only
It was
Ethereum,
on 6th of July 2020.
yeah, so about a
6th
year and
of
a half.
July 2020, you celebrated 1 billion a month, and now you're doing 1 to 2 billion a day.
And that's just normal, and that's peak bear market. But again, what's exciting to me and the biggest challenge I get to take on is most of that volume is on the hosted service. Only a tiny amount is used in prod on the network, because over a year and a half, Ethereum has been the only chain that has been enabled on the network, and quality of service is what we've been concentrating as core dev teams to build this technology over the past year and a half. Latency is better, uptime is naturally much better. QoS or query success rate in general is at par now with the hosted. And now we get to work on increasing UX, billing process, and then some other really exciting stuff like substreams that we'll talk about. And we're just now going cross chain. Gnosis chain is going to go mainnet this month. We've already announced Polygon as the chain after, but there are 39 chains altogether on the hosted service that will move over to the network. And that unlocks decentralized querying and indexing for the whole space, because the graph is the only one doing it in a decentralized way. And that means those 1.5 billion, or let's say 1 billion to 1.5 billion per day, are top of funnel that I just have the huge challenge of being able to move them over to the network, benefiting the system, benefiting the participants, but in my opinion, also extremely benefiting the users, because they'll have data that can't and won't get shut down, can't and won't get censored. And it's building something that I believe will probably be a main piece of infrastructure, um, in what will be a very Web3 driven world as Web3, just like software did in the past, as Web3 kind of eats the world's data. So that's such an exciting thing for me that I get to be part of this. And that, I'm 40 years old, so I'm almost 40 years old. So it's like I'm no spring chicken, but I have more energy than I have in a very long time. I'm excited every day. I work a ton, but I'm still a good dad and husband and so on. But it's like I am fulfilled in so many areas because of what I'm doing now and because of the mission, because who I get to work with. And it's still so early that I think it still has 3 to 5 years to even start to scratch the surface of what is possible, not only in Web3 but in the graph ecosystem and technology.
Do you see here, Kyle, competition possibility from the giants in Web2 indexing, Google and the likes?
I'd say, there was this thing that came out recently, and BigQuery is Google's centralized offering. BigQuery has been integrated with Ethereum for a long time. Not many people use it. Not only because it's a Web2 company that's probably going to be just like it did in Web2 and overtake things and the don't be evil and then the inverse of that later on. But when you think of any other solution out there, people aren't using it as much as the graph, I believe, because you can't use it to run an entire front end. You might be able to use it for some edge cases, but to get truly rich, robust data that drives an entire front end, it's hard to find. You just can't find better tech out there. And that's even right now when we're about to launch very large upgrades, such as substreams, Arbitrum Layer 2, verifiable queries that nobody has been working on and that the ecosystem has been working on for years. So the graph ecosystem is many years ahead of any, not only centralized, but Web3 competitor in general. And that's because the data ecosystem is extremely tough. And the longer the graph, and especially the graph network, remains and keeps getting better, the more battle tested it'll be, the more likely that it'll become the plumbing in general. And what's great is we're still building this in real time. And that's the most exciting thing in that is that it's not done. I don't think innovation will ever be done. I'd be bored if, in general, that's why I liked Web3 so much, because there's so much innovation. There's so many things that we'll be able to do that we're already doing R&D on many years out that we can't talk about. And then over the past few years, we've been working on things that we're just about to launch that are game changers and that no one will be able to even try to keep up with. But that's why I like the graph ecosystem, because they're doing R&D 3 to 5 years out and already launching groundbreaking technology upgrades that people will just have to try to fork. And then when they try to run it, it's tough because data is a very, very difficult task in this space. So yeah,
Go ahead.
in that I'd say we don't really think about competitors. It's not important to us. All that matters is us building good technology, building the community, and getting more entrenched participants to help us build something that is really good and necessary for the world.
Before I go to substreams and other innovations and groundbreaking technologies and things you're pioneering today, let me go to Denis and ask him a question that I believe the answer is very logical. However, I will try to make it complicated. Denis, if tomorrow morning a centralized mogul like Google comes up with technologies and solutions similar to what the graph has today, why would you believe? Now, I would understand why would Blocksquare not go to a centralized while we are advocating for decentralized, but why would you believe companies like ours and others may think of going that direction, if any? And please don't tell me there's none.
Oh, why they might go to the direction of using a centralized provider?
Yeah. Not any centralized, because there is centralized solutions today, but they don't approach. somebody like, again, a giant Google,
Yeah.
that is trusted more than any bank, that is trusted more than any home safe. It's Google. Why would
Well,
companies go or
let me,
not go in that direction?
yeah, let me just maybe go a couple of steps back because, as you know, I work directly with our dev team on both sides or all sides of our product. And for instance, what we've been doing with Ocean Point is we have this growth or roadmap, product roadmap, and we have these iterations. And honestly, in that development process, one of the things that we are the slowest at, honestly, is how we work on the upgrade for our subgraph. And that is something that is making us slow. But it doesn't mean the technology behind it is um, is not usable. That's what I'm trying to make. The point here is that building in a decentralized fashion is definitely not the easiest way of doing things. You have centralized services that make life easier, but in the end, it also depends what you're trying to achieve. What we are trying to achieve is bring an infrastructure on planet Earth that is essentially more or less unstoppable. Why? Because otherwise, certain things might not even happen in the future. You might have a regulator just saying, we need to shut these guys down. We need to shut down this technology, access to it. And if you rely on centralized services, you're going to get shut down. For instance, in Web3, I haven't seen, and there's a logical reason for it, um, on-ramping software that's built in a decentralized fashion. Why? Because it's tied to having certain licenses in place so that you can process credit card payments and stuff like that. But it's easy for a company to not be able to access Stripe or a service like that. That's kind of happens all across. And as long as this access is kind of limited by these gatekeepers, then guess what's happening with ownership of the products that are kind of pushed to market and champion the markets. Their chances are that the ownership of those products is also very centralized and probably in the hands of the few, which is kind of defeats the purpose of Web3, where what we want to achieve is democratize ownership of public infrastructure. We want to make infrastructure public, and I think when you design any type of product, you make those choices. You either go the hard way or the easy way. And we chose to go in the direction of using the subgraph as our core component for both the marketplace as well as Ocean Point. And I think this is kind of a choice you make. And to your question, I think people building in Web3 have not. I wouldn't say that the only reason for them to use something is because they just want to build something quickly, but they want to do it right as well. So from a perspective of a developer working on a Web3 project, it's exciting to build on new technology, on decentralized technology infrastructure, even though it makes things a bit harder. And yeah, I think
So let me ask
logical
you a question
choice
here.
will always be to use the Web3 provider that is true to its message instead of a Web2 or Web2 provider in Web3 disguise.
Let me ask you a question here to both of you gentlemen. Kyle just hinted that, the technology is still an embryo. It's not even an infant yet. It's years away from scratching the surface, and we agree on that. However, how certain are you? And I'll start with Dennis, and then I'll go to Kyle and continue with the substreams and other exciting stuff. How certain are you that the future is decentralized?
Mhm.
Well, Dennis is first.
It's a good question. I don't know the certainty. I would say that there's always going to be centralized parts of it, but it's not about it's about the level of centralization. If you imagine the internet is controlled by a couple of companies today, I don't think
Yeah.
that serves the purpose of humanity, because there's a lot of innovation that is does never see the light of day because of it, because these giants are employing the most smart people in the world because they can, and certain innovation doesn't happen because of it, because there's no motives of it happening. While if we have decentralized infrastructure, there's certain initiatives that can happen because of it, right? There's a bigger distribution of wealth. I mean, that's the romantic, I would say, idea of decentralization, but I would say they are more inclined that decentralization is actually happening even in Web3, even this stage of Web3, much more rapidly and much more aggressively than we think.
Kyle, what's your view?
It's a tough question to answer because it's so succinct, meaning I could slice it into a few different things. Do I think the entire world is going to run on decentralized technology in our lifetime? I'd say likely not. And on the other side, do I think that the majority of industries around the world will be building, at least in part, on decentralized technology? I'd take the opposite answer of, I think it is extremely likely that traditional finance, they're already starting finally after years, supply chains, personal identification information. I think so much around the world, hydrocarbons, oil and gas is tracking hydrocarbons on blockchains. It's just an excellent use case that's better in a lot of cases than the legacy technology that's being used, except these are large ships that are hard to turn when they want to steer a different direction. And the incentive is to preserve status quo. And what they'll do in silence is probably have small special operations or task forces that go out and do experiments. And when they realize the capacity, then they'll start doing it privately, silently on their own. And then they'll come out with these big public splashes. But you look at in just the not very long, a little over a decade from when this started, in just 2015, when Ethereum came out and people were building on open infrastructure permissionlessly. Now we have Disney, Adidas, Reddit, all these big brand names, Nike, Coca-Cola, all doing NFTs and seeing the value of that. And that's just like many people, their red pill. Everyone has a different red pill, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's Ethereum, whether it's different projects from there. Everyone has a red pill. And once they go down that rabbit hole, nothing makes people pay attention. Just like me, I started out as a volatility trader. Nothing made me pay attention more than a little skin in the game and realizing that it could be lucrative, and my dopamine receptors going off, obviously, when you get some wins. But then after the financial potential, the dopamine recedes, then you probably start looking under the hood and realizing this is just a really cool technology to implement in almost every vertical, both physical and digital, across the world. So to answer again, I think it's extremely likely, and it's becoming more and more likely every single day, even in the bear market right now, that in my lifetime, most of the world's verticals will be building, at least in part, on decentralized technology. Um, and if they aren't, that means they're either blocked mentally and they have organizations and oligopoly that shut it out on purpose and will get left behind, surpassed by others that take it on, or they it's just not I'd say that's it, because there's usually just an organizing council or body that decides not to. And just like a country that decides not to have technology come in and advance, and they lose a century or so, like a part of Asia that did that and is just now trying to fight back and assert its dominance again. It's pretty clear that if you don't embrace new technology, you're going to get left behind, and it might take years, but sometimes it can take decades or more to try to make up for that. And some business will go out of business, I think, eventually because they don't embrace it. So long-winded way of answering it, because it's such a difficult question that desires or that requires a lot of unpacking, I'd say.
Kyle, two things first. First, guys, we usually should wrap up here, but there's so much here that is wealth that I want to extract. So if you allow me and you have time, I would like to extend this. And even if we split it into two sessions afterwards, but we continue now because I love the flow. Kyle, is your time permitting?
I'm going to move something right now, and yes, I'll make sure we have some extra time here, because it'd be hard to get back into the flow of things. Hold on, but yes, let's do it.
Dennis, same to you for you. Perfect.
Yeah, I'm fine.
So,
Yep.
Kyle, I'll give you some time to move things around. I'll give Dennis here the screen. And Dennis, the question I want to ask you is the following. Don't you feel that there's decentralization in centralized organizations today? There is organizations that, in my opinion, for example, have been working on decentralizing matters for years now, centrally within their organization. Give me your view, please.
Okay. Um, so, can I ask you back, Makram, just for a split second? Um, if you can kind of just rephrase the part of centralized and decentralized, the relation in your question, if that's
Okay.
possible, because
So, do
maybe I
you
didn't
feel
catch. Yeah.
that the global institutions and organizations have been for ages running
Okay.
a process to decentralize matters from decision making to everything else that runs within their organization, even computing power
Okay.
and everything else. So yes, it's one organization, but everything is decentralized within it,
Okay.
and that has
All
been
right.
in the building for years now, or not?
Oh, you mean okay. So if you're referring here to the internal processes, this, like you said, decision making process, etc., of being kind of decentralized, I don't know if this is a route where organizations have been going. Honestly, I don't know. I don't see it. I see it as you have quite centralized governance or decision making within organizations. You have just layers below that centralization, which kind of make it harder for decisions to be taken, or unordinary or unorthodox decisions to be taken. For instance, I remember when we started Blocksquare, we wanted to do a we've done our pilot project, and then we were receiving inquiries by a bit larger organizations with a bit larger assets under management, and we were having great discussions with them, and then when the bear market started to hit in after 2018, um, they stepped away from it. So they didn't want to even taste it. They said, okay, it looks interesting, but let's revisit this in 12 to 18 months. And for a young project like us, this might be even devastating. We were managed to overcome this, but this is the things that happen, because you're trying to enter a market that is governed by this centrally controlled companies that are very, very rigid in their decision-making process, and everything needs to align perfectly for them to even try something new, right? So I think
So it's
in
layered,
that
it's layered,
moment,
but it's not
yeah.
decentralized.
Sorry?
So what you're saying is that it's layered, but not decentralized. Governance and
No.
decision making is still central.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that's kind of mainly that's how things run in the
Okay.
world.
Kyle, before we go to the innovations that are exciting to everyone, tell us some about the challenges, please, that the project is facing currently, and the challenges that and the roadmap. Sorry, so the challenges that you're facing today. How are you sorting them out, and where are you going with the project?
I think those are all intertwined. So I'll talk about challenges and I'll talk about the things we're launching to overcome those challenges. And that is kind of the roadmap. And so we can
Cool.
discuss all those things. I'd say that there are a lot of really worthwhile challenges. And I think of challenges as a good thing, which means something to overcome, which is just another brick wall to run through. But there's many challenges in the near term that are exciting, and then naturally some in the long term as well. I'd say near term is getting the network to continue working extremely well at scale across all 39 chains, something that has never been done by anyone because no one's building decentralized, as the graph is, again, really the only decentralized data indexing and query layer in space. And now that Ethereum's doing very well, it's going to be so exciting to see as Gnosis, Polygon, and then the other 35 chains, so 39 altogether. I'm sorry, 36 chains, so 39 altogether. And then when we can start plugging chains directly into the decentralized network as opposed to needing or you going to the hosted service first, that's something that when operating at scale is going to be such a massive achievement. Um, Even Ethereum in a decentralized way has been a massive achievement. So when we do it across 39 chains and maybe eventually 80, 100 or hundreds, this is paving the way for that future. So that's a big one. And then another one is launching substreams. First at scale operationally, and then working through the protocol economics to factor it into the work utility token ecosystem, GRT being the work utility token. And to understand what substreams does, probably better to start on the challenge. And the challenge is some developers still have an issue with indexing and syncing speeds because in the subgraph model or the open source APIs that people build, there's linear data processing and it's written in assembly script. And when moving to substreams, people will be able to, especially high powered subgraphs, will be able to move from assembly script to Rust and using Firehose, a primitive technology from Streaming Fast, a core dev, one of the multiple core devs in the ecosystem. It'll go from linear processing and assembly script on subgraphs to parallel data processing, which is consistently showing 50 to 100x improvements on indexing and syncing speeds. That has been a long-awaited developer and highly anticipated event. So substreams are really exciting. They're working in demo phase for some really large subgraphs and or substreams now, and we'll see how that looks once it goes into the wild at scale.
So Kyle, here, let
And
me stop you here just to, if you can explain to us, please, parallel data processing and what does it benefit and how does it work? That would be great.
I could do a point, but this is substreams technology. But let's just say there are different stages of data processing. And in the extract phase, it uses Firehose technology, and that creates flat files, which allows processing parallelized in the sense that, as opposed to going sequentially, which adds latency and things like ETH calls, call handlers, and so on, adding latency throughout the whole process. The Rust-based model, based on Firehose and now substreams, equates to parallel processing, which is why you're seeing these 100x in one case almost 800x processing speeds for indexing and syncing speeds. That's probably as deep as I'll want to go, so I don't step on my feet and get yelled at by Alex and the Streamfast team. And maybe we can have them on there to talk a little bit more in depth on that, or even Adam Fuller and others that are seeing this more technically from the bottom up. But I'll also say that subgraphs won't go away, meaning many projects will still use subgraphs. The biggest projects or the most data intensive will likely move to substreams and potentially even have subgraphs for different use cases. So they will probably operate in tandem or at the same time, depending on the use case for any given project, which is exciting. Sorry, I can't explain too much too further. And even if I'd want to, I wouldn't want to step on my feet here.
I believe you've done good. It's already too complex for someone like me, for example, but I believe you've done too good here. Dennis, you want to say something?
I just wanted to say that that we've seen that those improvements that you mentioned along, the discussion, in basically happening. It's just like with each iteration, or maybe every feature you add on the UI, you need to actually, improve or upgrade the subgraph as well, or add certain functionality of how you structure those candies that Kyle mentioned at the beginning. And I remember the last time we did a subgraph update, it just instantly indexed, which is something that before never happened. Before, in the previous iteration, it took some time, like a couple of minutes, for the new version to be up, indexed to 100%. Now it was just like straight up, no change or no downtime basically at all. It was just instantaneous. And I guess um, um, substreams are going to introduce even more, even quicker deployments, and open up new use cases, I guess, that people haven't thought of right now, but maybe in time. I guess it becomes much more relevant when you start looking into things that kind of in real time, like the game industry. I guess this is something that's directly addressing that type of projects, where you need to have really quick deliverability of data, I guess.
So here,
Yeah,
what we're talking about is, sorry, Kyle, we're talking about speed and efficiency. Is this the main thing that we're tackling here?
that's one of the main and most highly anticipated things. And one thing that people haven't realized yet is because it hasn't been in the wild is cross-chain data composability and being able to use substream primitives from another project on another chain to save a lot of time, not only to use other use cases of what people have already built, but then imagine if you could have, again, cross-chain data composability and how much time and efficiency that will create. And I'm not sure exactly how that will look at scale yet, but in theory, and Streaming Fast has proven it, and not just Streaming Fast, but the team in general has proven it. It'll be really exciting what that looks like and the use cases that come out of substreams. Because Dennis, you're right, it'll be something that we might not even be thinking of yet. So that's exciting. And I love innovation. I love working, tinkering, failing, iterating, because that always leads to a more exciting and successful outcome in the end. And so there are going to be, tens of thousands of people tinkering with this stuff, figuring out what to do better than what the 150 folks in the graph ecosystem working full time are. So
Perfect.
we'll
So
see. More to report on this.
100%. So today, what we're saying is that um, this is what it means to dApps, and then it passes on to the consumer, to to every single person around. It changes the whole ecosystem. It changes the feel of all technology that's depending on the graph and depending on subgraphs and substreams after that. What else do we have in the bag that is coming? When are substreams coming, by the way? When can people expect them?
Right now, they're in the demo phase. If people want to go start building, they can reach out and I could send over the docs, or we can put them in the show notes. You can reach out to me
Sure.
after.
Sure.
And I can't give a specific timeline yet, but it's soon-ish on going into the public to make sure everyone can start building on this. I'll say two more things. There's so much stuff in the graph roadmap. I don't want to take too much time. Two more things is one is moving away from Ethereum mainnet as interacting on the protocol and moving to Arbitrum, which will take folks from spending 30 to 50 or even more dollars for deploying a subgraph and have it cost $1. And then same thing with delegation, curation, indexing. Every time an indexer closes an allocation, it will be pennies on the dollar for every transaction. And that will make the network much more efficient because gas is expensive. Even though Ethereum gas is much lower than it was last year, it's still expensive. And it'll be really fun to implement Arbitrum and be able to pay a few cents to delegate my GRT to an indexer or multiple indexers. So that's exciting. And I'd say one of the most abstract and also underrated is the work that the R&D team, along with Semiotic Labs, who's a core developer, kind of in that machine learning, reinforcement learning space, and others are working on, is verifiable queries using ZK style technology, snarks of a sort that can mathematically prove that information is correct without manual intervention, which right now there is manual intervention with an attestation and dispute process that not only takes time, but is gas intensive as well. And when you can truly have verifiable information you can trust, and realizing that you don't need people to verify it. You don't need to worry about Twitter's blue check. You don't need to worry about some thumbs up from some rich oligopoly making decisions behind closed doors. That, I think, will change the game with data across the ecosystem. And if the ecosystem can make that happen across all chains, that's really, really exciting. And I think very, very underestimated how important that is. Like, verifiably true information, that alone is a magnum opus for any
So
protocol.
an algorithm that becomes the future notary for all of this information.
Yeah, it's the primitive to verify information that's flowing into a front end through this ecosystem. Uh, and what's great is it's also open source, which I truly believe in open source, because the more people working on things, the faster you can iterate and the more exciting things are later on, as I've mentioned. So that's what's fun about working in the open source world as well. Though it's really fun working in this ecosystem because we're usually a few years ahead.
Cool. Kyle, I have hundreds of questions that are coming up every time we ask a question. You give an answer, and then we can ask 100 questions after that. So what I suggest is, after this session, we'll collect some of the questions from our community, because I'm sure that many will have questions, as well as some of our questions. And then we may make small snippets here or there that would answer those, because I believe that what you have and what you're presenting to the world around us is something that is fun. To me, makes sense. I believe to our organization makes sense, not only to me as an individual, but also fits within the core of our belief system and our ethos. And you're approaching the world around us the same way that we're approaching it, which is pretty cool. Now, challenges. Obviously, some of those innovations are to deal with challenges that exist today. Are there challenges that the community and everyone else around us is trying to deal with within the graph that are prevalent today when we talk challenges?
Absolutely. One Denis already mentioned actually is decentralized technology takes more steps, is sometimes, at least through the gas process, more expensive upfront, not in the graph's case most of the time. And that's a challenge that we've taken incredibly seriously, because we've gotten a lot of feedback from the community of There are just too many steps in the UX, the billing process, and so on. And so the solutions that I and Brandon Kramer, who's a UI PM, and others have been working on, including Nena and the UI product team and others, is a fiat on ramp integration, which is coming fairly soon. Wouldn't give any specific timeline. And that means that right now you have to go to an exchange, you have to send the GRT to your wallet, and you have to bridge it to Polygon. A fiat on ramp will allow folks to do that immediately within the ecosystem, even though it's a widget that goes to an outside third party. That will decrease the steps 20% or more. And then we're working with that same fiat on ramp provider to have recurring payments and subscriptions, which means it abstracts GRT price volatility even more from users or subgraph developers' experiences. Which means right now you have to keep GRT in your API key, and as the price of GRT flows up and down, the purchasing power can hurt or help subgraph developers. And so imagine when you don't have to hold GRT on your balance sheet, it just all flows through the subscriptions and recurring payments and instantly pays your invoice and flows to GRT in the background to pay the participants without subgraph developers needing to deal with GRT at all. So that's something that I've been pushing and working with the team and the ecosystem teams on in general in the community. And that's a super exciting thing that has been very ad hoc because we got so much feedback, and something that we took so seriously that we said, we need to do this. We've made it a priority. And now that's, months into research and development and finally getting close to implementation.
And that's better music for institutions, I believe. Yeah, mainly.
I'd say
For
it's good.
corporates.
I'd say it's good for anyone. It's more comfortable for people that aren't crypto native. There are a lot of folks that use the graph that are crypto native that don't mind slanging across wallets and chains and all that. Like me, I'm very comfortable with that. But we need to, and I wouldn't say we, the ecosystem needs to build to the lowest common denominator, because imagine when Exxon Mobil wants to come track their hydrocarbons, if they're sitting on Ethereum, they want to put that into their UI for their users or their business to business, whatever use case they're using, or Walmart wants to track whatever on blockchains, it's Ethereum or some other blockchain. They need a simple UI. They need it to feel like a SaaS company, and that'll be exciting. And we've taken that on as a very important challenge of making it feel as smooth as Web 2 while having the power of decentralized plumbing and fulfilling the promises of Web 3, from verifiability and transparency, the robustness, uptime, latency, and so on, but feeling as smooth as what people have been getting used to for the past few decades. And that's
so on your radars are organizations like ExxonMobil and the likes, yeah?
No, I don't think so. In the sense that I wouldn't point out any specific company. I would point out that any company in Web 2, TradFi, or any other industry is, I believe, likely going to end up using something like the graph, probably the graph, to get data from a blockchain, because they'll end up having stuff on blockchains. And it's clear that you see Shell and others doing really interesting things with the blockchain technology. They're not, I don't think they're yet doing it on public blockchains, but I believe they will. And I think it's just a matter of time. But I know everyone's interested in looking into it, but they just haven't done it because they're a slow moving ship. And that's exciting because the graph will be there. The graph will be the technology that all of them use to get that data and populate it into whatever application or website they're using.
Kyle, before I pass it on to Denis for questions from Denis' side, why Arbitrum?
Few things, and I'll let the R&D team speak mostly to this, but you know what? I'm going to pass this to the R&D team, and there's some stuff I don't want to quote it wrong, and I've read through it and I understand it, but I don't want to say anything incorrectly. So if we want, we can always pop
That's appreciated, definitely.
Brandon
We'll
or
do
others
that.
on to explain it.
100%. And pardon my curiosity, I'm very curious when this comes up. For example, we use Ethereum, and we've built on Ethereum, and we did that because we believe that more important than the cost and the speed, sometimes it's the security and the stability, and definitely Dennis can talk much better about this. Dennis, do you have any questions for Kyle from your end?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to add, because you mentioned something on this last part of the conversation, right? How much do you feel like when you're building a decentralized protocol in a way, right? And then you have this improvements that improve user experience through maybe improved UI, right? How much do you feel that this is something that you need to tackle more from the central part of the DAO, as opposed to kind of just opening up a grant or something, an incentive for another, more peripheral part of the DAO to engage in building that component, let's say, or that feature, or that type of, because in the end, one could create a management SaaS platform that makes it much easier or much more institutional like to interact with and deploy subgraphs or utilize subgraphs, right? Just, why do I mean, it's always a choice. Do you do it, and it's not the correct word internally, but with the more kind of, it still has an epicenter, a DAO, right? And
You're saying through the core dev teams or outside.
exactly, yeah.
Mhm.
So how do you make those choices, or it's probably a tough one, but I guess there's a process that you have found that works the best so far.
Yeah, if you think of who stewards the core developer team and our actions and roadmap and so on, that's all through the Graph Foundation. The Graph Foundation gives grants out to get teams working on this technology full time, and they've done it with 6 teams now, 1 core subgraph developer and 5 core dev teams. So they're the ones making decisions on what each core dev is working on, depending on the strengths and weaknesses, but we're all working together in a big way. But to answer your question, I'll take it in 3 ways. There are 3 things I'd say that I'd categorize it in. One is the core dev teams, and if the core dev teams don't have capacity, or even if they do, to increase the innovation and get the community involved, there are grants. And the Graph Foundation gives out millions every year, I think, with grants, aside from the core dev grants, that are in 4 categories. One is education, one is community building, but the 2 that are more technical is dev tooling and protocol enhancement, I believe. So around those, I can't remember the exact name of them. And there are big grants out there working on things like this, whether it's building subgraphs, whether it's working on the UI, whether it's doing something else and then being incorporated, whether it's needed from the core dev teams or they can just do it on their own, because this is a permissionless network that people can build on in general. And so core dev teams, the grants in general through the Graph Foundation, and then it's just the community involvement in general. And this community is massive, and there are a lot of very involved people that haven't even received grants. They're just very important parts of the community that are building things, building UIs for the community, building UIs that potentially, and I think have been implemented within the network in general. So this is definitely not a small 150 plus person hodgepodge of teams, the core dev teams. This is many, many hundreds, probably thousands of people around the world working to make this technology work. And that's what's fun, being a decentralized organism that's all working together. Or I wouldn't even say organization, just this massively incentivized, either emotionally, financially, and so on, to build this technology that's a public good. It's really cool. I never even imagined before I heard of Web3. I never imagined something like this would be able to work. I would never imagine that a decentralized organization would be able to come together and think of the merge through Ethereum. How many people were working on that? And that's what the graph will be, because it'll be people all around the world working on this thing. And then the Graph Foundation is actually abstracting a lot of its work to different DAOs. So the Graph Advocates DAO, which is doing interesting things around the world, the Subgraph DAO, and others. So DAOifying a lot of their responsibilities. And that'll be really cool to see if the Graph Foundation and core dev teams can abstract and really subtract our involvement. I gave a great talk about this at DevCon, to subtract our involvement completely and let the world take over and make this a public good that the world's pushing forward, not any certain number of people or teams. And that's the goal. And again, it remains to be seen, but it's an exciting challenge to take on.
Very cool. Very cool.
Kyle,
You,
as
you
heading
mentioned the
partnership.
word. We need to. Sorry, Makram. We need to remember a word. He said DAOify. That they're DAOifying.
Applications. Yeah.
Exactly. That's a new thing in our terminology. Kyle, you mentioned you had partnerships. Any exciting new partnerships coming up that you can talk about?
No.
So,
Not that
so
I
there
not
is
that
exciting, and they're exciting and new, but not that you can talk about. That's
Yeah.
good enough.
And I've taken on the personality of this ecosystem that we're probably not going to announce something until it's launching. Meaning I don't want to like blowing smoke. I don't want to cause any FOMO. We don't really care about that. We just care about getting the work done. And then when things come out, we'll announce it, or even launch in silence and just let the community figure it out. And I love that ethos. And so, yeah, a lot of exciting and new, but nothing I'll talk about.
Dennis, do you have any further questions for Kyle?
No, nothing. I
Do you have
enjoyed the
any other
conversation.
message? Look,
Yeah.
the graph is a major part of our infrastructure. Yeah, building the infrastructure that we're building to the world. Do you have any comments on this session, Dennis? Do you have any views that you want us to conclude with before concluding with Kyle?
We need to have it like this for Blocksquare.
Love
You
it.
don't know what it is, Makram, probably.
I now noticed.
That was
No,
sent
before
to
that,
me-
I
it
didn't.
was sent to me some time ago. I think, I don't know, Kyle. I think you sent it after
I think I did that.
the Twitter Spaces.
Yeah, I was wondering, Dennis, why do you look better today? That's probably one of
Yeah.
the reasons.
That shine. Love it.
And I'm jealous already, so I need one of those T-shirts. Kyle, do you have anything to tell your community, the community that supports the project, that supports the technology? Do you have anything to tell the partners and anyone else, everyone else around? Because all what you said today signifies to me the infinite opportunity within what you're looking for and the infinite way of thinking. I'm a person who's been studying infinity for so long. I've never talked about it. I've never written about it, but it's fun to understand that between 0 and 1 are infinite elements. And what you're talking about here, when you're engaging everyone in the world, you're really tapping into the infinite opportunity, and probabilities are infinite. And when you're building open source in a decentralized manner, I believe that's something that you may achieve. And I hope you do achieve, although because of the non-clarity of such a huge achievement, or non-clarity of what can come out of it, it's scary as well. Yeah, when you really look into it, it's scary as much as exciting. What are your messages to everyone, including partners and definitely members of the community?
Two things. You said scary, and I think scary is fun, because if you're not challenging yourself, just like if you're not working out a muscle, it's just getting weaker. And so I'll always go to this probably scariest and most challenging. And then two, to end on the potential for the graph and the total addressable market, and to use your word, infinite. If you think of any Oracle, any blockchain, they record one transaction. But what's really exciting to me, probably why data is such a both lucrative but also ubiquitous and usually the most powerful market in anything that we've seen from Web 2 and so on. It's because one data point, even one data point, can be read an infinite amount of times going into the future. And think of how many data points will be on the blockchain, and the graph will be used an infinite amount of times for each one of those data points. That's exciting, and we don't know the scale of what it will be in Web3 alone, just the Web3 as it is right now, let alone if the world adopts this technology and when the graph's used for it. So it's just kind of mind-blowing and exciting and scary in the best possible way, I'd say.
Kyle, before we end, the elephant in the room, everyone is talking today about one thing. It's a bear market. It's everything is crashing around us. How and where are we going with all of this? Now, something here worth mentioning probably is that um, organizations usually get stronger, or the right organizations in bear markets. When you mentioned 1 billion queries per month in July of 2020, you also hit in April, May 2021, 20 billion a month. Today, you're at 30 to 60 billion a month. What does this indicate to you? And what will the graph as a technology, as a project, do within the coming bear market? Because I believe we're still at the beginning of it, if I understand it right.
I do have to hop off in 1 minute, but I will end with two things there. One, I'm very fortunate to be in a well-funded protocol ecosystem that we'll be building for a long time in the future, regardless of what the market does. So that's great in my mind. It provides a lot of security for me. And then two, when you think of growth, network subgraphs are consistently growing around 25% per quarter. Query fees were up over 50% in Q3, but we're actually almost 30%. It was 29% just in the month of November alone. So it's speeding up. And then one really cool stat that I was just looking at is last December, the protocol was averaging 100 GRT query fees per day. It's now consistently over 11,000 and sometimes much higher than that. So that's 110x so far. And I'm looking and really excited about doing, I'm not going to say something similar, but excited about continuing to push that forward and increasing overall ecosystem utility and benefiting participants across the world. So that's all I'll say for
Kyle,
that.
I don't want to take more of your time. Thank you so much, and I'll not
Yeah.
ask even Dennis for a last word here, because you are out of time. Thank you so much for giving us this time. Blocksquare thanks you. Everyone else around us also thanks you. Our community definitely enjoys utilizing the technology that's built using subgraphs and hopefully using substreams and more in the future. We enjoyed it, and I hope that we added value to our community. Thank you, everyone who joined us with Kyle Rojas and Mr. Denis Petrovcic and Makram Hani today.